As a young adult, I spent months studying agriculture in Ghana, West Africa, one of my ancestral homelands. My mentors were the queen mothers of Manya Krobo, guardians of culture, history, and land. They asked me one day, is it true that in the United States, most farmers put a seed in the ground and they don't pray or sing or pour libations or dance or even say thank you to the seed, and they expect it to grow and feed them? When I ashamedly admitted to the truth of this, they said, well, no wonder you're all sick. You treat the earth as a thing and not as a living relative. You see, the seed and all that it stood for was so precious to our ancestral grandmothers in West Africa that they braided seeds of black rice into their hair while trapped in the bowels of transatlantic slave ships. They hid away the okra, molokia, Levant cotton, sesame, and black-eyed peas that they had saved for generations. They secreted the melon, amara, kale, sorrel, basil, tamarind, and kola that had co-evolved with their people. The seed was their most precious legacy, and they believed against odds in the future of tilling and reaping the earth. They believed that their descendants would exist and that we would inherit the gift and honor the gift of the seed. With the seed, our grandmothers also braided their ecosystemic and cultural knowledge. They braided the wisdom of sharing the land, such as the Husa co-op farm system of the Krobo people. They braided the wisdom of sharing labor and wealth, such as the Dokpwe worker co-ops and the Susu credit unions of the Dahomey people. They braided the wisdom of caring for the sacred earth, such as the carbon-capturing dark earth compost of Ghana, the no-till raised beds of the Ovambo people, the soil-stabilizing polycultures of Nigeria, the rotational grazing and swidden agriculture of Guinea, and the Zai and Tassa pits that turn the Sahel desert green. When our ancestors arrived in colonial America, they tragically encountered a very different system of relating to land and food, one rooted in stolen land, exploited labor, and an extractive relationship with the earth. Armed with the white Christian doctrine of discovery, settlers perpetuated genocide, enslaved millions, concentrated land and power, and in just one generation, stripped the soil of over 50% of its organic matter. To this day, we live under food and land apartheid, with over 98% of the agricultural land being white-owned. Black farmers currently operate just 1.5% of the nation's farms, down from 14% in 1910, having lost over 12 million acres to USDA discrimination, racist violence, and legal trickery. Over 80% of the people working the land in the United States are Latine, yet only 2.5% of our farms are owned and operated by that community, making managing a farm among the whitest jobs in America. Agricultural workers are not protected by the same labor laws as other workers and don't have the right to overtime, days off, fair wages, or collective bargaining. Hunger, diabetes, heart disease, kidney failure, and other diet-related illnesses unequally burden people of color. Today, Black and brown communities remain disproportionately landless and with inadequate access to life-giving foods. The food system's oppression of people is mirrored in its harm to the earth, with agriculture among the leading causes of water withdrawals, greenhouse gas emissions, and habitat loss. Yet despite the heartbreak and terror they experienced from the extractive food system, there were Black farmers in every generation who remembered the seeds they had inherited and the wisdom those seeds carried. Ecological humility is part of the cultural heritage of Black people. While our 400+ years immersion in racial capitalism has attempted to squash that connection to the sacred earth, there were those who persisted in believing that the land and waters are family members and who acted accordingly. Who were some of these rememberers? Well, Dr. George Washington Carver, Black agronomist at Tuskegee University, remembered. He said, "Unkindness to anything means an injustice done to that thing. The above principle applies equally to soil." He spent the pre-dawn hours in the forest listening to the divine voice of the plants to give him instructions for his agroecological research. Arguably one of the founders of the modern organic and regenerative movement, Carver advanced leguminous cover cropping, mulching, composting, and crop rotation, and restored severely degraded southern soils. Right relationship with land was also remembered by Booker T. Whatley, one of the progenitors of diversified small farms and farm-to-table strategies like pick your own, community-supported agriculture, and direct-to-consumer marketing. Whatley's ideas made it possible for farmers to rise out of abject poverty while restoring their soil to health. Cooperative land ownership and cooperative labor were remembered by Shirley and Charles Sherrod in founding the first ever community land trust in the state of Georgia, and by Fannie Lou Hamer in creating Freedom Farms in Mississippi with other sharecroppers. Understanding that land care and social justice are intertwined, Ancestor Hamer taught us that if you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to say or do. Generation after generation, despite having lost nearly all of their land, the seed of the living earth was passed down in the Black farming community through the hands of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, National Black Farmers Association, Land Loss Prevention Project, Hattie Carthen's Urban Gardens, and now to us. When I started farming over 25 years ago, I began to wonder how I could honor the legacy of the seeds braided into my ancestors' hair. I wondered if I could help create a farm based on the wisdom carried in those seeds. And I wondered if all of us together could show that ancestral farming is both productive and ecologically sensible, a viable way to feed the planet without destroying it. In 2010, Soulfire Farm was born with a mission to reclaim ancestral belonging to land and to end racism and exploitation in the food system. Using Afro-Indigenous farming practices like raised beds, silvopasture, perennial, polyculture, no-till, and mulching, we started working to regenerate 80 acres of land. In just 12 years, we remediated a foot of topsoil, increased diversity in the soil microbiome, and tripled the levels of organic matter. The soil in my left hand is where we began. The rich, dark, aromatic humus in my right hand is where we are today. The land where we farm is held cooperatively, giving nature rights and a vote on the council, and returning land rights to the Mohican people through a cultural respect easement. The harvest of the land is shared through solidarity shares, with no-cost weekly doorstep deliveries provided to people surviving food apartheid. We train and equip the rising generation of Black and brown farmers, and now have over 1,000 alumni who are setting up their own regenerative heritage farming projects. And the Soulfire community is not alone. Sibling farm organizations like SAFON, National Black Food and Justice Alliance, East New York Farms, Black Church Food Security Network, and myriad more Black and Indigenous earth stewards are keeping our agrarian traditions alive and learning how to hear the voice of the seeds once again. The movement is growing, and the soil can tell. For every 1% increase in organic matter, we sequester roughly 8.5 metric tons of atmospheric carbon per acre. So if we were to scale these ancestral farming practices globally, spreading the seeds of regenerative annual cropping, tree intercropping, and silvopasture, we could pull over 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil where it belongs. And we can still grow enough food to feed the world. Yields in intercropped polyculture fields are generally higher than in monocropped fields, and the yield gap between organic and conventional is shrinking over time. When we stop using quarterly returns in our calculus and switch to a generational timescale, the internal and external yields of ancestral agriculture rise dramatically. Yet it's not enough to just emulate Afro-Indigenous agricultural practices, or those from Indigenous communities across the globe. We must have the courage to address generational trauma from centuries of land-based oppression. While the land was the scene of these crimes, the land was never the criminal. By working together on land reform, farm worker rights, reparative justice for Black farmers, and rematriation of land for Indigenous communities, we can ensure that those with essential ecosystemic and cultural remembering have the resources to implement the land-honoring practices that we desperately need. In this time, when we are acutely aware of the fractures in our system of runaway consumption and corporate insatiability, the path forward demands that we take our rightful place as the younger siblings in creation, deferring to the oceans, forest, mountains, and seeds as our teachers. By practicing ecological humility, we heal the soil, the planet, and ourselves. As we all work together to uproot racism and seed sovereignty in the food system, we pray that the words of our mouths, the meditation of our hearts, and the work of our hands be acceptable to our grandmothers who passed us these sacred seeds. Ashe.